This is another RPGaDay response from the Casting Shadows blog and channel. This is the start of our third week for RPGaDay. It's August 15th, and the 15th question is asking about inspiration. From where do we draw our inspiration for playing role-playing games? And while it may sound like this is a Game Master-oriented question, it really isn't. Where do you draw your inspiration from for playing role-playing games as a player? Where does your inspiration come from for characters as a game master? Where does your information come for characters, for worlds, and so on? So, let's get to it. When this topic comes up in conversation in my circle of friends, one of the things that I find to be repeated most often, at least in my circles, is the idea of the combination. It feels like people want to run a game that's based on more than one thing. Like, for example, they've played a video game that had a cool element, and they read a series of books which had a setting that they really liked, but the story isn't something that they wanted to try and recreate at the table. But that video game, combining those two things together, and maybe this other book they read when they were a kid, put all those elements together, and you've got the basis for something that they really want to play and pitch. And have you played it too? And do you want to try this? And this sort of thing. I find if we look all the way back to the beginning of the hobby, if we look at something as simple as Appendix N in the Dungeon Master's Guide, this is what we're seeing. We're seeing one group of gamers communicating to another group of gamers saying, look, this stuff is really cool, and take it, read it, get inspired by it, mix it all together, and have fun. The inspiration is drawn from so many different sources, and blend them together as you see fit. Make something that you find to be really cool. That the alchemy, the magic of combining these different things and making it your own. I think this goes on in the backs of our minds all the time once we start playing. I think the stripping down of a thing, of an idea, to its base elements, and something else comes out from that combination and recombination. The more I started to think about the idea of this active combination, the more I recognized that part is process. That requires you. And so it started to feel less and less like inspiration to me. That felt like the crucible in which the ingredients of inspiration are added, and then the process, the creative process inside each of us, starts to take over, making whatever it is that we put in there distinctly ours, and the product of play and the product of our group. So that combination, while it's an important aspect of what comes from inspiration, it's not really an answer to the question. Well, then I began to wonder. I began to wonder about my own sources of inspiration. They're kind of hard to pin down. I don't have a long history in my own gaming of drawing directly from books. I have very specific instances where I drew from books, but it's not the habit, it's not the norm. Same with movies, not the habit or the norm, just specific cases, such as the ongoing campaign we have now with Star Wars. This is the exception, not the rule. I often choose to play in games or worlds which are already distillations of ideas, such as White Wolf's Aberrant or its Vampire, or they are toolkits like RuneQuest, Mithras, this kind of thing, where you really are taking specific fantasy elements which have already been distilled down and assembling them into a coherent whole. So the gathering of inspiration process, that part has been done. And so, what are my sources of inspiration? The question, once the question became an RPGaDay question, started to bother me. So I flipped it on its head. I started to think, when gaming, what is the product? What has been the product at my table? And there's a very specific focus, I feel, on characters making decisions. You could say that there are characters taking actions, or there are characters exploring things, or whatever. But from my point of view at the table, what the game is setting up is decision points, where we learn about character, where we experience character, or maybe we feel a character through that point of decision. And then there's after the game, where we talk about those choices, we talk about those decisions. It's definitely a two-part experience for me, and I enjoy both parts equally. And in a sense, it makes me feel of things like campfire tales, where you're telling stories of these larger-than-life characters, maybe from the Old West or whatever, and you're focused on these large-scale details of character, and then what they did. Right, what they decided to do, what they were pushed into doing, what they were forced to do, that sort of thing. That's what attracts me. Where does inspiration for that come from? Of course it's from things that I read, but I find, oddly enough, that the thing that inspires me to sit down and formulate a pitch for a game tends to be music. And in the quiet times during the day where my inspiration is bubbling up, that's what I'm doing. I'm listening to music. When the physicality of life is removed or distracted by doing some repetitive task like dishwashing or whatever, then what remains is just the mental space, the silence for the inspiration to fill. What am I filling it with? I'm filling it in those moments with music. And so I find that no matter what I'm listening to, there tends to be some form of story in it, whether it's the story about the singer's emotion, or a past experience, or a hope, or an ideal, whatever it is, that starts me thinking. That is like a filter that I'm applying to the game worlds that live inside me. And I start to imagine. And that's the inspiration. Ultimately, for me, the creative process begins from that point of inspiration. And while I don't use music in my games, not really, I use it as a prop, not as a support mechanism for play. In my head, while we play, there's often callbacks, references to the music which sparked the idea for the situation or the location or the character or the question or the challenge or whatever that surfaces at that time. And while we play in a very improvisational style, where does the source of the material that gets used in that improvisation come from? Part of it is from practice. Part of it is from familiarity with whatever game it is we're playing. Part of it is understanding of the characters who are involved, and part of it is that inner distillation of the music I was listening to when I was thinking about what if, what if, what if, what if, what if. So my answer for this question, long and convoluted as it is my greatest source of inspiration for RPGs is music. Tomorrow's question for Tuesday, August 16th is, what historical figure would you like to have in your group? And for what game? Look forward to seeing what your answers are. Take care. Autocratic's RPGaDay, this year sponsored by the RPG Brigade, is all about sharing the positive aspects of our hobby, role-playing gaming, with a wider world. You can get involved as easily as leaving a comment, posting a tweet, or making a video. #RPGaDay.